What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we're a channel that does mental health through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. I'm a writer, podcaster, and the director of our Horrific Hope Film Festival. If you guys would like to submit your nightmares, whether they be screenplays, to our screenplay writing contest, short films, or feature films, click the links in the descriptions below. And if you would like to support our festival, because we can't do it without you guys, there's also a link in the show notes below for that as well. Down there, you'll also find links to our podcasts, more movie reviews like this, our Patreon, how to support us financially, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. Now, this is a movie I have been waiting to talk about for a couple of months, and because the embargo is now lifted, I can do so. This movie has one of the greatest film titles that I've ever heard, and let's find out if this movie's quality matches the film's title. I've got here all the information of where you guys can find this movie if you guys are curious about it. If you guys are a US resident, you guys can check it out this upcoming Tuesday when it hits Screambox. Not to mention, you guys can also get it VOD, courtesy of Amazon and Vudu. And if you guys are a Canadian citizen, you guys can also check it out via VOD on the platforms iTunes, Xbox, and Google. This movie tells the story of Roscoe, who's a hotel worker. He's in kind of a troubled relationship, and he comes across a box of hallucinogenic worms. And the film kind of follows his trip on said worms. This movie has one of the most interesting premises for a movie that I've seen in recent memory. I love the idea of the kind of trip because it really allows for the film to kind of explore some incredible visuals. And in the terms of visuals, this movie does not let its viewer down. It is in just such a visually stunning and satisfying movie. And on top of that, it's not just the visuals that are that come forth from this drug trip. It's actually also the cinematography. Like, before we ever have the concept of worms introduced in this movie just feels so warm and inviting, and the cinematography in this movie is just breathtaking. Easily probably one of the most beautiful movies I've seen this year. I don't know how to quite describe the cinematography. To me, it kind of feels like a 70s era film or a film from another era, where it kind of has the warm tint to it that some of like the 80s homage films are now doing nowadays, and this movie is right up there with it. Performances in this movie are also really riveting. I was really captivated by each and every performer, no matter how big or small the role was. It just really seemed like when they were casting this movie, they went above and beyond, and it shows. Even from tiny cameos up until, featured players, this movie feels like it is just honestly one of the best acted horror movies of the year. I sing all of these praises to say that L Jacked Up has an incredible resume that it boasts, but it doesn't do enough with its narrative. The pacing for this movie is literally all over the place. Like, this is a movie that should be good in concept because of its things like its visuals, its cinematography, its direction, and its performances, but it falls apart because of this narrative. This movie clocks in under 75 minutes, and it is just one of the most awkwardly paced movies I've ever seen. Like, the fact that this movie takes its time setting everything up throughout the first act, like the concept of worms doesn't even get introduced until right around the cusp of the second act. And the fact that you can inject these worms to create a psychedelic feeling doesn't get introduced until almost the halfway point in the movie, if not a little over the halfway point. And the last act of this movie, the last 25 minutes of this movie, just feels like it falls apart because it feels like it's trying to do too much in the span of time, and honestly feels like they just either ran out of budget, they ran against, just a number of other things, and it really does show. And with the narrative, it has a lot of pacing issues, as I've been saying, but also at the same time, it has arcs for these characters that really don't go anywhere. Like I talked earlier about how Roscoe kind of has a weird dynamic with his lady, and like that should have been like a pivotal plot point, and it's just kind of tossed to the wind. Not to mention another character, Benny, kind of has this like weird obsession with like wanting to be a father that could have been a really interesting character study, but it just literally goes nowhere. That's my biggest problem with this movie, is how it sets up plot lines that would have really paid off really well against the insanity of this movie, but the filmmakers decide to embrace the insanity rather than actually balancing the film to create an even product. Instead, we're left with a film that feels unbalanced and just embracing weird for the sake of being weird. And I'm a weird guy. I love seeing movies that are really weird. Tusk and Human Centipede are probably great examples of viewing pleasures I've walked away with and just been like, wow, man, that was weird. Yoga Hosers is another notable one. But I walked away from this movie just kind of really disappointed because I didn't never connected with the characters. The characters are paper thin. This movie is just really weird for being weird's sake, and I feel like there will be some people that will truly love this movie, probably some people that may have already had the chance of seeing this movie, but I think overall the experience of this movie is just really lackluster, and it's really frustrating. So on a Rorschach rating scale, all jacked up and full of worms is not going to be full of stars because it's only getting a 2 out of 5. Like I said, this movie has every right to be better than it is, but its narrative and its pacing is what kills it. Let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health from the film of which we're reviewing and talk about it for just a few moments and hope to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. And like I said, the narrative issues I have from this movie, the setup alone is really good, but in the setup, when we meet Roscoe, you can kind of see that he's having some relationship issues, and it's a toxic relationship, and they're basically, he's basically trying to save this relationship. And I think this movie puts it out plainly that don't be around toxic people. You don't have to subject yourself to toxicity just to be loved. Because chances are somewhere down the line you are actually robbing someone else of loving you and treating you the way that you need to be treated, but instead you're choosing to stick with the toxicity. That's one of the most heartbreaking things about this movie, and it's a stark reminder for us and the viewers to always be vigilant, to be in healthy relationships. Be in relationships that are healthy, actually healthy, not healthy disguised as toxicity as Roscoe has here. Because by staying around in those toxic relationships, what ends up happening is you end up kind of creating this persona that you are not good enough, that you're not worthy, and that really starts to make really starts to take its own toll, and you also start to question your own ability to self-love. And for the sake of your mental health, you need to know how to be able to love someone else and also to love yourself first and foremost. Because people come and go, but at the end of the day, you are left with yourself each and every day, day in and day out for the rest of your life. So take care of your mental health and guard your heart and the toxic relationships that you allowed it in. I really hope that helps, and just click the links in the descriptions below to check out our mental health resource library. Hit the subscribe button when you guys are down there, and be sure to check out All Jacked Up and Full of Worms when it hits Screambox and various VOD sites beginning this upcoming Tuesday, November 8th. And have a good night. We'll be back later to talk about more movies. Have a good night.